Day of the UK IGF 2020. We had a fascinating day, and I'll try to wrap up some of the discussion and some of the notes I took throughout the day, and we'll open it up for discussion and any questions that you may have. So trying to go through it very briefly is we first started the day with the Minister's address in which Chris Phelps said that the UK government wants to promote a UK as centre for digital innovation, as a centre for growth and investment. And there's some 30 billion of private investment is being put into the tech companies, into the UK, which is more than twice that of any nearest European competitor, which is Germany. He also talked about expectations that online safety bill will be submitted to Parliament in the first half of 2022. I believe he mentioned March, as well as that the UK government see technology in all forms as critical to the UK's future. He spoke about determination that the digital and scientific, that the UK becomes a digital and scientific superpower. And we'll be all hearing announcements in the budget to support his announcements. He also talked about removing a lot of roadblocks for the tech and digital industry to grow in the UK. He especially mentioned some visas and coordination with universities so that inventions from universities could easier reach the companies that are startups and working in the tech sector. So from his address, it was definitely certain that the UK is doing everything to make technology great, and that our efforts being made to, according to his words, balance the online harms bill and issues such as resolving online harms bills and also having adequate regulation to address some of the challenges. I believe his focus was entirely on innovation, and balancing privacy and innovation was something that he talked about. And he got a lot of questions from the audience about the online bill that is the draft that he's hoping to be accepted in the first half next year. Following the ministerial address, we also had Eleanor Bradley, the nominate interim CEO, address the audience and welcome everyone to the UK IGF. And we had a following panel that was on the data protection framework. What I could say about that panel is that there were quite a lot of mixed views as opposed to potential benefits of Brexit for GDPR. There was a general agreement that changes can be made, and that we should not, using a GDPR, that we should not be definitely losing the GDPR as a starting block. But some people argued that the protections should not be removed, and that the primary legislative changes may not even be necessary to achieve the goals of increased flexibility. Then I think the panel also talked about data flows and data flows across border, which represent an opportunity for the UK to take the lead, which the EU may even have to follow. And people's experience of data at the community level varies a lot. And trust is important for consumer engagement with data systems, and particularly for vulnerable communities. One of the strong takeaways I also we heard from that panel on data protection frameworks that governments and the UK should recognize that the big tech companies are building infrastructure without data that will then collect data directly from the end user, shutting out smaller companies from data processes and creating monopolies on data infrastructures. So these are the remarks on the UK's data protection frameworks, and that panel was in aim to discuss the benefits and development, and especially the use of AI and greater data sharing in order to realize data's full potential. After many networking breaks, we had another fascinating panel, and that panel was on the gender violence, and I took a lot of notes from that panel. We had, again, fantastic set of speakers who spoke a lot about the survivors of online gender violence, and also came up with a lot of suggestions and practical things that both government and the private sector, especially employees of companies, could do to mitigate the problem of gender violence. We heard that majority and of women had, with the increased use of the internet during the COVID pandemic, had to use pseudonyms on many online platforms in order to avoid bullying, to avoid cyber flashing. And there is a lot of need in the education that needs to take place offline in order to look at some of these impacts. So the impact of the lockdown has increased online abuse, and there have been figures that were mentioned that you can see in the recordings, and there's also more silence is compliance, and tracking abuse online gave BT evidence to try and address it. So the UK has also been said that the UK could be very protectionist, a desire to restrict anonymity, to restrict age controls, and often impairing on freedom of speech. And as well, it was said that police don't have much power to do anything or act on many forms of online abuse. So there is additional education required, especially in that sector. So that's some closing remarks were also mentioning that the government would therefore invest in digital citizenship education, and that employees should act to help educate their employees on staying safe online and the harms of online abuse. We have 1 more minute, and I'll try to sum up the very last panel, which is on the future of the internet, where we had a fascinating discussion about the early evolution of the internet and what were the characteristics that have made it so good and big and interoperable and resilient. And some of the participants mentioned permissionless innovation, decentralized operations, and incremental nature of the internet and openness. And then we moved on to a discussion where we tried to address, the panel tried to address some questions from the floor about market decentralization and who is in best position to address the decentralization of the internet and its services. We also had some mixed views there, where some participants thought that it is not technology issue. It's not a job of technologies to address decentralization by inventing different protocols, and while others also argue there should be more of an involvement between the private sector and the standards body organizations in order to address some of the outcomes of the more and more decentralized nature of the internet service, of the centralized nature of internet service provisioning. I think panelists were also of an opinion that is a reflection of the market power and dynamics, and that we should not blame technology for it. We then also talked about some risk of fragmentation. We also talked about new standards and how difficult it would be to deploy from scratch a completely new IP, for example, or any other globally interoperable protocol in terms of the vendors and time to develop new protocols, let alone the equipment design and manufacturing and overall interoperability. I would also like to mention that I think the theme that was going throughout that last panel about the future of the internet was that there should be really more coordination and a multi-stakeholder approach in order to achieve the way, the stability and sustainability of the internet that we know today, and that politically we have two forces on one side, policy, and that technical standards are now somehow inspiring more political discussions. And we talked about several examples, DOH and the new IP, and where we see, the tendency to do something new, but there isn't enough discussion and involvement from all stakeholders. One more thing that was mentioned among many other things were certainly that users also should be somehow more present in the policy making of how technology impacts society, as well as some argued that governments should also get closer involvement in the development of internet standards, whilst we also heard that this is already happening in some section of technology like mobile telephony, not so much internet standards. We touched upon some of the notes about what is happening in some online standards fora, and about a couple of new proposals and how realistic they are. So with that, we also, on an ending note, it was said that internet is only 40 years young and not old. There is a great future in front of us, and that we need to carefully look at all the factors that are influencing this complex network of networks of that we currently have, and get more stakeholder involvement. I will stop here and see if somebody else has any, before I thank everyone, any questions or a burning comment from the audience that would like to, they can raise their hand or put a question in the Q&A. And whilst you're doing that, I would sincerely like to thank all the colleagues at the Steering Programme Committee of the UK IGF, as well as the diversity of speakers and great moderators that we had this morning, this very first day. I hope you found it as exciting and as information rich as there were the chats. Sessions full of great ideas, comments, and additions that we cannot capture in this 10 minutes today that we have for the wrap-up. So seeing none of the QAs, I would like to thank everyone for their patience and for joining us today. And I hope that you will also join us tomorrow, and also to thank some of our sponsors, ISOC UK Chapter England, and the Nominet, Donuts, and Internet Society, and Open Rights Group, and everyone who you see on our website, global partners as well. So thank you all for the very rich and excellent day.